It's my honor to welcome you all to the inaugural event of the Conversations on Trust in Science and Technology lecture series. The Haudenosaunee peoples have a rich and vibrant culture that embraces knowledge and sharing of that knowledge. It is important to reflect and acknowledge that the University of Waterloo's campuses in Waterloo, Kitchener, and Cambridge are situated on the Haldimand Tract, land 6 miles on each side of the Grand River, granted to the Haudenosaunee of 6 nations. The land inside and surrounding the Haldimand Tract, including our Stratford campus, is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee. I also acknowledge and recognize this area is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis groups. My name is Vivek Goel, and it's my privilege to serve as President and Vice Chancellor here at the University of Waterloo, and welcome to everyone here in the room and joining us online. This lecture series comes at an extraordinary time when society is increasingly polarized in the midst of shifting geopolitical tensions, climate change, and a strained health system, amongst many other crises. The spread of misinformation, along with the astonishing speed of technological advancements, are changing the way we interact and learn about the world around us. In late June, a hate-motivated attack shook our Waterloo campus. The attack was a frightening reminder of the important work that still needs to be done individually and collectively to address all forms of violence, hatred, and bigotry. The attack also highlighted the underlying issue of trust. Trust in each other, trust in our institutions, and trust in scholarship and science. As a public health physician, I've often been in the position of having to communicate challenging, complex scientific ideas to the public, often through colleagues in the media. And I've seen over the course of my career the decline in trust of science and evidence. It is sad to see the stature of science and research diminish in the eyes of some. However, I'm emboldened when I see the work being done by our colleagues from across disciplines. In establishing this Trust Scholarly Network, we're beginning the challenging but important conversations to improve communication with the public and once again build trust in research, science, and technology. It is research, science, and technology that will empower us towards a promising future. We're fortunate to live and work in a region with a high concentration of academic institutions and think tanks. These institutions are playing an important role, both independently and together, to build evidence-based contributions to inform public discourse and opinion and further the knowledge society. Thank you for participating today and showing your interest in the future. We must all do our part in building trust in scholarly pursuits. We're proud to partner with CBC Kitchener-Waterloo to deliver this evening's lecture. While our institutions play a role in sharing evidence-based knowledge, so do broadcasters such as the CBC. It is a responsibility that none of us should take lightly. Both of our institutions, the University of Waterloo and the CBC, have built strong reputations through upholding this responsibility, and we're pleased to partner on this event. Tonight's lecture will be moderated by CBC Radio's Craig Norris, A gifted radio and television personality, Craig has hosted the region's top-rated radio morning show. He just reminded me of that as well. The Morning Edition, for more than a decade. Every weekday morning, he shares the stories, news, and personalities that matter to our community. Please welcome Craig Norris.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goel. I am honored to be moderating this panel this evening and to sort of shepherd us through this. I want to welcome everyone that's joining us here in person. Hello, everybody. You look great. I also want to welcome the people that are joining us virtually online on the live stream. We are glad that you at home or wherever you are, as long as you're not driving, could be part of this discussion. Now, this is the conversation we're going to have tonight is a conversation that is incredibly important right now, especially. In our daily lives, we are constantly inundated with information and misinformation, and it is increasingly leading to confusion and mistrust, which is why you're all here. This is the first lecture in the Trust Lecture Series. Starting tonight, leaders from the University of Waterloo are coming together to better share and discuss the role of academia in earning and sustaining trust when it comes to science and technology. Now, in just a moment, we will hear from Nobel laureate Donna Strickland. After that, I will sit down with Donna and some of her colleagues for what is sure to be a lively and thought-provoking discussion. And you, too, will have the opportunity, both in person and virtually, to ask questions during our panel discussion. Now, we have already gathered some questions that were submitted when you registered. I don't know if any of you filled out the question section, but we will be using some of those as well. And we're going to be posing as many of those as we can. Now, to honor those people who are tuning in virtually, we will have a hard finishing time tonight of 8:30 p.m. Now, so if you don't get to some of your questions, we appreciate your understanding in advance, and we hope that you will join us and at the next Trust Lecture that I'll share some information more at the end of the event. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker, Nobel laureate Donna Strickland. Donna is an accomplished academic and has held many prestigious positions. In 1997, she joined the University of Waterloo, where her ultra-fast laser group develops high-intensity laser systems for nonlinear optics investigations. Today, she is a professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Waterloo. Perhaps most notably, Donna is one of the recipients of the Nobel Prize in Physics 2018. The prize-winning research on chirped pulse amplification has several applications in today in industry and medicine. Donna is one of the inaugural co-founders of the Trust Scholarly Network, and we're about to hear why she is so passionate about this new program at the University of Waterloo. Please join me in welcoming Donna Strickland.
Thank you very much, Craig. So yes, as Craig said, I'm one of the people, and it was really a conversation with the Dean of Engineering, Mary Wells, that got us started down this road. I think this is something that we're both passionate about, and we both thought that we needed a network on this. But I did not start down this road with trust. First, I have to get to my talk. Oops, right, I know. So this is the new Trust Network that we're all here to talk about tonight and hear about and start having the conversation. But first, let me just tell you why I even thought about walking down this path. And it was more about science literacy. And when I say science literacy, I really mean sort of these three things. One, I really would like the public to have an awareness of the impact science has on society. I don't think here in North America in particular, we have a great understanding of that impact. I think it's much better understood in the Eastern countries. The other thing I would like us to know about is just the scientific process. It's not like I expect everybody to know all areas of science. I wouldn't want to be tested on many areas of science, not even all the physics, okay? So it's not that. But there's other parts of science, and the main one that I would really like people to start understanding, and I hope our students start learning at a much younger age, is just the scientific process. And along with that comes my last point, which is timescales. People don't get the timescales of science, and it came up with the vaccines. Some people said, it came so fast, how can we trust it? And other people said, why is it taking so long, right? And so it's understanding the scientific process, how much review, how much oversight we have, how many times it's our mistakes that don't necessarily get published, but shape what we do. And so that there is an awful lot of trial and error in science, and this is why it takes time. And also, it's about starting with a fundamental idea all the way till it's finally a useful product at the end. So these are the things that I would really like the public to understand. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Oops, got to keep track of which one I'm doing. Okay, the main one, and the reason I really got started about thinking about this, and it was back in 2011 when I really started thinking about it, was the science can be a huge economic driver if you let it be. And so my favorite example is Korea, and everybody that's working on this trust has heard this go on about this for a long time. And so I went to Korea for the first time in 2011. And so, do I want to show the next picture first? Yeah, I do. Okay, so this is a chart that you can download or get the data from, and it's showing the percentage of the GDP spent on R&D. These are the 32 countries of the OECD. I've only colored some of them, and the words are there, but you're not going to see the words, so I put them bigger here. So you'll see Korea is very near the top. Just in case you're wondering, Israel is the absolute top. U.S. has always been fairly healthy here, but you'll see it's on the rise here to get up to about 3.5%. The United Kingdom is blue, and you can see for a long time they were below us, Canada, down here. And they thought at some year, oh my goodness, what are we doing down here? We got to spend some money on science. And so they kicked themselves up. They still realized they were below the average, which is the black line, and so they've kicked themselves up again. Now, and this one is Canada. We trickled along here, and then I love how we're racing to the bottom. So this I'm worried about, okay? And so then, why do I think it's important that we spend money on R&D? So in 2011, I was on the presidential chain of this optics organization, then called OSA, and now called Optica. And this is the first international trip that we all take. And I just saw the most fantastic optics labs I had seen anywhere in the world. They were just so impressive, and I got to see many of them. And they took me to, and I'm sorry if you're Korean and I'm butchering this word, but I went to the city Daejeon, which is the science city. They built a city just for science in Korea. So this is where they have multiple universities, but they have their flagship graduate university, KAIST, the Korean Advanced Institute for Science and Technology. They moved there, or they started, I think, government research labs there, and as the industries came, they asked them to put their research labs there, so that there would be government, academia, and industry all working together. So I saw these beautiful labs, and then in 2011, one of the other trips I took was to Russia, and I'm going along, and I see 3 big billboards, and it's for LG, Hyundai, and Samsung, 3 in a row. And it just hit me. I've never been in any country and seen 3 billboards for any Canadian companies, let alone 3 huge technology or manufacturing companies like this. Then the other thing that struck me in 2011 was that OSA then also asked me to be on a committee to decide which students coming from underserved countries should get a grant to come to the annual meeting in the United States. And one of the applicants was from Korea. And so I contacted OSA and I went, I don't understand. I was just there. I saw the most beautiful labs I've seen anywhere. Those scientists can afford to send their people to the United States. And they go, well, we have to follow the World Bank, and they're still listed as a middle income or poor country, and so they still get to come. I go, well, that's ridiculous. But anyway, okay, we have to go with the rules. But so then for this talk, I looked it up. And so this comes from the World Bank in their Office of Korea as the first former aid recipient to become a member of the Development Assistance Committee of OPEC in 2010. So I think our list was just a couple of years out of date, maybe. The Korea's gross national income per capita increased rapidly from $67 in the early 50s. I'm going to repeat that. They were poor. After their war, their GNI was $67. And it has climbed to $32,000. So they are somewhat behind Canada with all of our wealth of resources, but they are climbing that fast. And if you noticed on the previous slide, they appreciate how much their investment in science has led to this. And that's why they're climbing and climbing. Their GDP is growing, and they're still taking always a bigger percentage to make sure that they keep on growing. They really get the role of science as an economic driver. Now, that's not the only thing, though, about science literacy. So I have a few others, and these have come up when I've given talks. When COVID first hit, I ended up giving a lot of talks to graduating optics people. And so the point I was usually making was, can you imagine if this had happened when I was in grad school? So that was not 50 years ago, but I put 50 there anyway, okay? Nice round number. But if you could imagine, if we had the pandemic 50 years ago and we're all told that we had to work from home, it would have been almost impossible. There would not have been the incredible communications that we have. We would have had to still go to the physical library to get information. We would not have had these huge data centers. We would not have been able to do video Zoom meetings or Microsoft Teams meetings. And so all of these things that help our society would not have happened if we had not invested around the world in these science and technology. So then the other one, and as Viveka said, he's in public health, and I think most people get the importance of doing research in medicine. Most of us have a loved one who's suffering from cancer, and so we all think it's worthwhile giving money for cancer research. But most people don't realize that, of course, there's an awful lot of research that went in for the decades, if not centuries before, so that that final step can be made in medical research, all right? And so I can only talk from my own example, but when the laser was invented in 1960, and again, talking about timescales, it was Albert Einstein who came up with the equations that are the basis. He did that in 1916. It was 1960 before we had a laser. And when the laser came along, everybody said it was a technology looking for an application. People were just wanting to see if they could make it work, and nobody was really worried about the applications. But of course now, and including medicine, lasers are used just about everywhere. And so people have to understand that, Einstein in 1916 was not thinking about the applications that were going to come along when he was just coming up with the theoretical equations about how light and matter interact. And so an awful lot of research needs to be done, and it's a time scale. It takes a long time to finally get a laser, and then much longer than that before it was applied to medicine. And finally, we're going to morph into the trust. One of the other areas that, of course, we really should be listening to our scientists is in climate change. They've been warning us for decades of what is coming. I don't think there's very many people left on the planet that can't see that we have too many forest fires, too many floods, too many hurricanes now. And yet we did not actually respond quickly enough and like we should have, and we haven't put all of the adaptations and the sustainable energy sources in play that we could have had we listened to the scientists and trusted that they did know what they were talking about. Oh yeah, wrong one. Okay, so then trust in science, why is it eroding? And so I am going to use examples from COVID, because this is something we've all lived through recently. And so, of course, it's already been mentioned, misinformation is one of our biggest problems right now. And so the example is vaccine. A number of years ago, there was wrong science done that said there was a link between vaccines and autism. Now, if we understand the scientific process, we would know that as soon as something wonderful like that that's really controversial, other scientists are going to jump on it and do the experiments all around it or even try to replicate those results. And very quickly on a scientific timescale, scientists understood that there was something wrong with that research. And the science community moved on. The science community understood then that what was wrong with that research, they put in the right protocols and they moved on and realized that this was not. The problem with misinformation now is somebody could quote that one study, and because people do not understand the scientific process and think to themselves, oh, the scientists would have done something with that, or what are they thinking now, they can just stick with that one piece of bad data. And people that are social influencers or are on TV talk shows can just keep, they have a child with autism and they go, oh, that's the reason, and they shout it. And unfortunately, most of the public listens to them instead of the scientists. This is what I think we have to address. When we talk about scientific issues, we really should be listening to scientists and not social influencers. So, okay, that's the one. And then poor science communication. So obviously scientists aren't known as really great communicators, and I'll admit to that. And obviously we do have to learn to be better than that, but this is not really, I don't think, what the Trust Network's about, although we have to do that. What I'm thinking, well, first of all, the example I'm giving here, this came up, I actually had the opportunity to speak about failure in science at the Stratford Festival. And we were talking about this exact thing, and when COVID first hit, we weren't really ready for it. And we didn't have enough N95 masks. And so they really did want to keep them for the medical professionals that should have them, but somehow the communication wasn't that. The communication was more like, you don't really need them, you can put on a cloth mask, you'll be okay. And we should have all been honest, but for some reason, and I don't know, Craig, if it's a sound bite of the media or what it is, but there doesn't seem to be maybe enough time to get the whole explanation out that everybody can understand. So there's multiple reasons why science communication is not necessarily helping us. But also, I'm going to go back to the lack of the scientific process. The masking really was a science experiment happening in real time. We didn't know when COVID hit, did it come out as droplets or did it come out as aerosols? People researched that. People really didn't know how much came out. People had to research that. People didn't know in the size of the room with the type of airflow. People studied that. People studied then how good for those size of aerosols and droplets were the various types of masks. And this is why the rules of masks did keep changing. And I think most scientists caught on that, oh, I get it. It's a science experiment happening. Some things work like they think, some things don't work like they think. They change the experiment, they move on, and things keep changing. And that's the way science works. But it was very frustrating for the public because they kept thinking the scientists don't know what they're doing, right? They keep changing their mind. And exactly right, we were changing our mind, but that's because it's not like we understood what COVID was until COVID hit, and it took some time to get that going. Okay, so this is it. So now the question is, what are we going to do as a network? What do we want to do to address these issues? And, how do we reach the public? So again, this is one of the reasons that I wanted to speak at Stratford and hope that we get more people like playwrights on our side to want to write plays about science. But even the people that would come to Stratford during the Stratford Festival are not necessarily the scientists. I spend my life now giving public talks. This is what I do for most of my time now. And I can get a big crowd to come and hear me talk about the laser that won me the Nobel Prize. But I'm pretty sure that everybody in that room already loves science. I am not going to be somebody who can bring in a crowd of non-science loving people to have a conversation with. So I'm hoping that we can attract sports heroes and media lovers and movie stars and rock stars or whoever that the everyday person listens to and start having the conversation through them. But also, I want to say that we need a dialogue. It's not at all about scientists telling you, even though you're all listening to a science tell you something, that's not what it's about. We have to be the listeners, and so this is one of the main things that we're going to do with this network, is go out and talk to groups of people, but let them tell us what their problems with science and scientists is and are, okay? We need to understand why our message is not getting through, why do they not want to listen to it, where is the disconnect between what the scientists think would be a good thing, like we should be doing something about climate change, but that does not resonate with every group of people. And so we do need to understand it. And of course, one of the reasons we're having the talk here is we need to get the public involved. And so hopefully we get to do some citizen science, that we get school children involved, we can get everybody involved. Not only does that help whatever science that we'll all do, and we have that much more data to look at, but also when the public are involved in taking the data, and when the public are looking at the raw data, and the public are thinking more about it, then they become more involved in the process. They understand the scientific process. They'll understand how long it takes to move from our understanding from here to here. And hopefully, they'll learn to trust us too. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Donna, for shaping the conversation, challenging ever-evolving ideologies on tech and science. I'd like to now introduce fellow Trust colleagues for our panel discussion. I want to first introduce Ashley Mellenbacher. She's the an associate professor and co-director of the Trust Scholarly Network. I want to pass the floor to you, Ashley, and from your perspective, from your perch, share a little bit about your perspective, how you became interested in the goals of Trust Scholarly Network.
Sure. So my background in English is in rhetorical studies. So I'll give a quick overview of that. So it's not just sort of, it's not the pejorative use of rhetoric, but it's really trying to understand how people identify with one another, how they connect, how they communicate, how we argue, and how we come together to do things in the world. So whether that's sort of in a civic sense or in science. So my background in research looks at science and science communication and rhetoric. So there's a lot of work that has gone on in the humanities and social sciences to study issues of trust. So I think it aligns well with the kind of goals of the network, and it really provides some of the research basis to begin having those kinds of interdisciplinary conversations that we're hoping to have with this network.
Awesome. I'd like now to introduce the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Waterloo, Mary Wells. She is an executive member of the Trust Scholarly Network. So Mary, can you speak a bit about your passion and your involvement on the topic of creating access and to mobilizing knowledge that rebuilds trust in science and tech?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of aspects I'm particularly interested in. One of them is when we think about trust in technology, and when we look at how our human relationship with technology has evolved, it's quite different and has evolved very rapidly over time. And in fact, Vivek mentioned how quickly new developments in technology are happening and the pace of change, and can humans actually keep up and adapt to that? And so, you know, we educate engineers for the future, and future leaders, and future developers of technology. So I'm really interested in how we can teach our engineers, who are the designers and developers of this technology, what are the things you can do to embed trust in the technologies that you are designing and building, and to teach our engineers to think beyond just the technical, can we make this technology, but also should we make this technology? Both thinking about the intended consequences of what they want the technology to be able to do, but the unintended consequences that may occur. And by giving them that breadth of thought, let's say, I hope that we can touch on both them being able to think about those intended, but also the possible unintended consequences they would never normally think of, that go really beyond the technical functioning of the device or whatever it may be, to how humans are interacting with it and how they're then interacting with each other and the possible consequences it may have on their lives.
I want to ask Donna, I know you touched on it a bit in your talk, but when it comes to the network, what research is the network starting or doing to better understand the issues around trust?
Well, we are just getting started.
Yeah,
Let's say that. And I will tell you that Ashley is doing most of the legwork here. But I think we want to do many things. We want to see, can we get a citizen science going? And the one that's near and dear to my heart, because I'm also thinking about environmental sensing, is to place environmental sensors on schools. And so I think that would be a great one if we can get that one figured out. I will tell you that Glasgow, Scotland does this. And after they had all of the school children looking at the data and following it, they made the public policy decision to not drive kids to school anymore. And why are we driving kids to school? I don't know, but that's a different issue. Anyway, but that was a public policy driven by the science. And you could make that public policy decision pretty easily because the parents and the children were very aware of watching the air pollution get worse when the cars came and went. And so that's just one of them. But also, I think I was very clear when Mary and I first started talking about it, is that I want this to be a research-based network. I want us to do research. And so it will belong more with the social science people, but I want us to come up with some reason that we think there's no trust after the dialogues, then have some kind of test of how much people trust us on whatever topic that is, do our change, and test again. And so I definitely want it research-based so that after each of these conversations, we come up with a plan as to how we could address it, test before and test after.
So it's measurable.
So it's measurable.
Yeah. Why, Ashley, is it so important to have researchers from so many different disciplines talking about this?
So the subject of trust has been studied from a lot of disciplines already, and drawing on the research that has been done involves understanding the context of that research and figuring out exactly what everybody means by trust. So if you're going to measure something like trust, you've got to know what you mean by trust. So because there are so many different uses and sort of characterizations, that's one of the goals that we have, is to start aligning some of those conversations across disciplines. But it's also important to have sort of sometimes what we talk about is transdisciplinary focus, which is, so we include all of the humanities and social scientists, but also scientists because they have the experience and technologists of working in these domains. They understand some of the issues, the problems, the challenges in the histories, but also moving beyond that, beyond sort of researchers in academia, to involve others in conversations, and that includes things like participatory science, because those are also important, whether it's forms of expertise, I guess, so we can talk about multiple expertises, including lived experience.
I want to ask everyone out there, and I don't know if you want to reveal yourselves, but how many of you, just show of hands, how many of you would consider that you work in the field of science? Okay, that's not as many. Okay, so when we talk about a broader audience, right? We're talking about reaching a broader audience. How do we do this? How do we begin this journey, Mary? I guess
Well,
nights like tonight.
Yeah, I think tonight is a great night and ways to engage the public in what I would call a safe space, so that they can legitimately voice their concerns and we can legitimately listen to what they're saying. So I think it's that. I love the idea of the Citizen Science Project, because I think that's going across to our community, our kids, and other people, just general public people, to engage in science in a different kind of way. And so I think this is the beginning of these conversations, and that's why this is a public event. And I really encourage all of you to stay engaged with this network and to think about our next lecture in January and stuff.
Yeah,
Engage in it,
there's
so.
cool ones coming up. This one is great. No, I'm not saying you didn't,
Even cooler ones coming up.
No, they're not cooler. They're equally as cool.
Equally as cool, sorry.
You mentioned, Donna, social media influencers. And it's, it is easy to scapegoat them. But I mean, the role of social media when it comes to trust. Talk about that.
Well, again,
Well,
I did a bad thing there. For the number of times I've done this. I'll correct myself, it's okay. So I think, and it's not just, I'm old enough to not actually know really what a social, but I do, even talk show hosts from TV have this role that unfortunately, people that get their million hits on what it used to be TikTok and now I don't even know X, or whatever the other newer, more modern ones are, those people have a much louder voice, you know? If I went on TikTok, I wouldn't have 1 million people watching me. And so these people have a tremendous voice, and they don't have to say the whole truth. They can pick whatever truth they want to say and put it out there. And the problem is now is that because there are so many ways to get your information, we can all just hone in on the people that say what we want to hear. And I think this is one of the biggest problems, is that we're all siloing into our own echo chambers and listening to what we want to hear. And this would be true for the scientists as well. But we have to be able to break those down and get out of that.
So you're going to start a TikTok account? Is that
No.
Okay, that's what I heard. Sorry. When you showed that GDP graph, is part of this discussion that we don't put a value on science, like as a society?
No, and I think that this is particularly, I think, true in the West, and I think it's even more true. I think the United States has done better for us. Now, some people will say that that's anybody who wants a big military has to invest a lot in R&D just for the military, right? I think you can even see in Ukraine now, they've probably never spent so much on drones as they are right now and new ways to use them. And so there's that aspect of it. But I also think Canada, relies on having 15% of the world's resources and 0.5% of the world's population. And this is good for a while, but if we really do start dealing with climate change and we do stop using many of those natural resources, is Canada going to be ready for the next economic challenge? And we should be in our timescales idea, right? Because Korea looked at 52 and didn't say, we want to be rich by 55. They said, we want to be better off for our kids and we want our grandchildren still even better off, and they took that long view. And so we've got to be taking the long view. What are we going to do in 20 years when people don't really want to buy our gas? And this is what I'm worried about, that we're not thinking enough about it.
And how do you square that with, we're going to get to, we have some questions that were sent in, just so you know, we're going to get to those in a second, and then we'll take some questions from the audience as well. But how do you square that with what, you also said when this all takes so long, but Mary, you also talk about how quickly technology is moving. I mean, is that a friction between those two things? Like how slow science?
Well, and I would say science is slow, but I do think when you're doing fundamental research, it does take longer time. Now, when we look at the lasers now and how they're being used, now that you've got those fundamentals there, when you look at the use cases, it can move very rapidly. But I do think there could be a tension there in terms of, again, as you talk about the timescales and things. So, and I think, again, thinking as educators, which is what we all are here, how do we teach our students to be able to communicate effectively? When we go to conferences, we always talk to our peers that know the language we use and that we can speak to. Rarely do we go to conferences where they don't. And how do we teach our students to learn the different language used, the language they use? How do they become effective communicators? Because I think the more people can understand, the more it does lead to trust. And I really applaud you for going to the Stratford Festival as a really diverse venue. And we, as even as researchers ourselves, we should be pushing the boundary and going into different venues to speak to people and to communicate and learn how to do that effectively.
Especially when I had to say what my failures were. Okay, just saying.
We're going to take some submitted questions here from when, so maybe this is your question out there. How does the crisis of replicability affect the trust that we ought to have in the body of knowledge that sciences have generated over time? That replicability seems to be the gist of a lot of people's concerns.
I'm leaving that with you, Ashley.
Okay, so the crisis of replicability, sometimes, so if you're not familiar with it, there's been what's sometimes characterized as a replication crisis across some domains of the social sciences and life sciences. And essentially what this means is it's difficult to, or you're unable to replicate previous studies. There are a lot of reasons for this that I think can affect trust and trust differently. So some of that is, which I think is often the popular sort of characterization, is there's misconduct of some kind, right? So what are sometimes called questionable research practices. So that can certainly be a factor in this, but it can also be the way that research is communicated, right? So if we're not providing a lot of the details about methods for someone to replicate a study, it could also be the population that you studied is hard to replicate, or it's difficult to maybe even understand or some of the protocols that were used. So more effectively communicating that. So there are, I think, ways that this is being addressed in research for both researchers and also for, I guess, folks from the public to trust this research as well, which includes things like pre-registered studies. So you register your study ahead of time and you sort of say, here's what I'm going to do. So then it's harder to do any of what are sometimes talked about as questionable research practices, right? So I think the other part of that, though, that's important is doing that kind of work also allows scientists to trust the kind of work that they're doing in the community they're doing it with, because there's certainly within science pressures to publish and pressures to publish something that's novel. So there are definitely aspects of that in the replication crisis that I think get addressed when maybe even if you've pre-registered a study, you have null results or no results, which maybe raises other issues for the issue of how much research is produced, but I'll leave that there.
Well, and that's where and we keep, look, COVID is the best example of this right now, obviously. I mean, given, we were supposed to wash our mail and then we weren't. Cloth masks, but the fact is, that did happen. And there is a great question that sort of dovetails with what you said too. Sadly, some loved ones have fallen down the rabbit hole of mis or disinformation in the last 5 years, with the pandemic being the height of the tension. This is a tough question, I think, at this point, but how can we speak to those closest to us, and we all know them, who are victims of the negative culture shift towards science? How do we do that? Mary Wells, we'll begin with you.
Oh my gosh, well, I get the hardest question so far, so. I think that is a tough question. I think, we can try and listen to what, where they're at and what series of events have occurred that have caused them to lose trust in science, and try and understand that and empathize with that. But then this is where I think this network is so important. What are the factors that go into rebuilding trust? And I wouldn't be able to tell you all of them right now. And this is where I think that that's why we need this interdisciplinary network to tell us what are those factors that cause people to trust or to start to distrust science, and so that we can understand that and help those people to start to rebuild their trust in science. And I do think that right now, still today in Canada, maybe around the world, let's just talk about Canada, universities do have a relatively high trust for the most part in what we do as kind of the honest brokers that will speak the truth. And in fact, that's what universities are meant to do, is to seek out the truth and find it. And that's part of our mission. And so how can we build on that and leverage that as a vehicle to start to help to rebuild trust in science? And that, again, that what we're doing, the heart of it is to help people, really, and to help society versus being very profit motivated and things. And I think, again, that's why we have this view as the honest brokers a little bit. And how can we leverage that?
Who else would like to jump on that?
This was too hard for me.
It's more of a psychology question almost, Do you have any thoughts on this, Ashley?
Yeah.
So I think, and this is my always unsatisfying answer as a rhetorician, is it depends, right? So it's going to depend on your relationship with the person, their background, how you communicate with them, what the issue is. But I think in each of those cases, it's also important to remember part of the goal isn't merely corrective, but to really understand why someone's sort of maybe following these points or talking about these issues. And sort of the first step is often just engaging that conversation in a kind of authentic way to understand what it is that's bothering someone, right? As opposed to just kind of coming in with, your data or your research articles you've brought to prove them wrong. So that's generally not very persuasive, right? So if you want to actually have a conversation, and I don't mean persuasive in a sort of sense of just moving them to your side, but maybe coming to an understanding together, right, of kind of what's going on.
And something you said too, Donna, when you talked about the beginning of the COVID, the pandemic, why, I always thought that if scientists, and I say, science, had to come out and said, look, we've never seen anything like this before, we're going to screw some things up. Like, was that because the public probably didn't want to hear that from scientists? Like, I think it would have been just better to go, look, and I keep going back to washing your groceries in mail, but we may tell you have to do that, and then it turns out you don't. That doesn't mean everything else we've said is incorrect.
Right. I believe in honesty at all times.
Yeah.
And so I don't understand why we cannot say we don't know. And so to be safest, this is all we can say.
Right.
To be absolute safest from whatever it might be, these are what you should be doing. But we don't know. And I also think, though, that not only do we not know, we don't know how to have conversations that are publicly aired. This is the problem, because, again, it depends on which each person is coming from. They can hear the same thing said and hear it in a totally different way. And so maybe this is something that our network can start to figure out, that when we find out which blocks, which things are not being communicated well, that then the scientists will be trained on how to not only not use our jargon, but to explain it in a way that's, and as Mary says, authentic. Yeah. But a lot of scientists do not like to say they don't know. I say it all the time, but and now I'm allowed to. But a lot of scientists are afraid to say it, right? And this is also something we will have to get over.
And I think, using COVID as an example, because like I say, it is the most tangible one, the stakes were pretty high.
Yes.
Right? And I think probably the society at large was not ready to hear that there was someone that we trust that didn't know.
Didn't know, yeah.
Even though it may have been okay to say that, right? Another submitted question: what do you think were the biggest mistakes made in the name of science during the COVID era, and what role is there for scientists to play in? We just sort of talked about in rectifying those mistakes. Mary?
Well, I think that not explaining to the public in an authentic way that this is how science works, that this is the best advice we're giving you now. And I do think there were some attempts made to do that. And maybe, again, as Donna said, you just hear what you want to hear at that moment in time, and people are frightened and things. But just to explain that the science is evolving, and that what we are recommending will evolve over time. And so there wasn't this beginning of lack of trust, because now we were told to do one thing one day, now suddenly it's changing and we're told to do something the next day. And so I think it was a bit of a failure of communication, and authentic and real communication, and to be a little bit more honest about what we did know and what we didn't know. And again, how that scientific process works, and how we should expect that some change will come over time as things evolve and we gain more knowledge. So I think, I don't know if I would call it a mistake, but it was something that was occurring. And as we look back in hindsight, I think we were doing the best we could at the time, but when we look in hindsight, maybe that would have been a better approach.
Anyone else want to get in on that?
But also, I think economics was there to play too. I think most science would say, every school, get your giant fans going, right? Come on, governments, get the money rolling. And yet, there is an economics thing, and so you could have pushback and go, oh, you guys could be figuring out something better than that. And so there is this play, that there was a lot at play there, right? We didn't know. The scientists were doing their best. There was economics, there was politics, there was all of this going on, and each of them had their role to play in the miscommunication.
I think the learn from home, especially for the little kids, has been so devastating to them too. So I think they felt they were keeping them safe for now, but there's long-term impacts on their learning and how they integrate into society. I remember seeing a little boy that it was in the later stages of COVID, but he'd come over and he said to me right away, "Don't come near me, I have to stay safe." And he was 5 years old. He will forever have a fear of being close to people, I think, because of this experience. So what will be the impacts there?
True. I mean, I think the general consensus was, kids, they'll bounce back.
Yeah,
They
won't.
Yeah.
So I think that was a mistake. I mean, it was an inadvertent mistake, but I do think there's going to be some longer-term consequences on them.
Do you have anything to add, Ashley? Or do you concur with everything that's been?
I think those are a lot of the key issues that were going on. I think we could also think about the ways that we, broadly try to communicate out information that's really complex, and also ensure we're not engaging in what's sometimes talked about as the deficit model, which is basically, if folks don't know, I'll just tell them more, and then they'll see my point and they'll agree with me, right? Which we know doesn't work because there are a lot of different reasons that people might, for example, when we think about something like vaccine hesitancy, right? There are a lot of issues at play that we need to understand to actually authentically engage in conversations that aren't just simply a matter of more information or data.
And the big one now, again, it seems to be cropping up, is the efficacy of masks. Now there was a study that came out that's, masks, even N95s, didn't do much. But, and I saw an interview with Anthony Fauci in the States, and he said, I can show you 10 studies that show you that they do. So, I mean, there is such a friction there to contend with for, just people going through their daily lives, right? I'm going to ask a live online question here. There are going to be questions. We're going to take questions from the audience. There are people, if you can show yourselves, listen to me, show yourselves. They have microphones, and we will, if you raise your hands, and they will come to you. We're just going to do one more question. This is a live online question, and this is a good one. This is from someone who's listening in online. How can Indigenous populations be engaged in trust? What considerations have you taken specifically?
Sure, so I can jump in on that. Yeah, we're having some conversations with folks. So we're really sort of early on in the network in some of those conversations. So what I can say is those are happening, and we're really trying to think carefully about how we're approaching conversations around some of these subjects and issues and ensuring, Indigenous leaders and appropriate folks are involved in those. So we are hoping to be able to say more about that in the coming weeks.
And I don't want to obviously speak for anyone on this stage except for myself, but because this is, as Donna said, early going here in trust, I mean, things like this you'll probably learn from as well, right? And you'll
Absolutely.
Yeah, you'll meld this into.
Absolutely.
Let's start with some audience questions. Can't really see the microphone. Okay.
Front here, though.
I see a couple.
Oh, here we are.
On this
Alyssa
side.
has a microphone there.
Hi, thanks for providing this event. This is amazing. I'm a high school science educator, and right now the requirement for graduation are 2 science credits. And I know just recently, it's a long time since I was a grad here, there's now a communications and science, and I think computer science and engineering requirement for grads, which I think is just incredible. And I just wondered if Trust would ever work to lobby for such a credit requirement for high school students, to improve in that communications and understanding of science. So just a question there.
That's sort of something that you mentioned, right?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I might say thank you so much for coming. It's really, teachers are such an important part of building trust. And one thing I will say, I've looked at a lot of the data around participation in science courses in high school, and Ontario is one of the lowest in terms of boys or girls choosing to study things like physics, or in fact, physics is the least liked course in high school out of all the sciences. Nobody wants to take physics, because I don't know why. You have to be really smart or something. Okay, all right, so what I do think as a province, we should be looking at high school and what the courses are, and what kind of people do we want to graduate in terms of the knowledge base that they have. And I do think that, ideas around communication are so important and things. So, and, in provinces like Saskatchewan, we see fairly high levels, but I think it's maybe they have less choice in terms of the opportunities for students. Like here, there's so much choice in high schools of the kinds of electives you can take and graduate and things. So I don't know, that's another conversation, but I totally agree. I think that would be a great opportunity, because the better we can communicate with each other, I just think it does lead to better trust and better understanding amongst each other, so.
Okay. We're going to get to as many questions as possible. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, I guess I identify as a victim of someone who's lost faith in science. And for me, it was the origin of COVID discussion. So we now know from Fauci's emails from before the big panic in March that he knew it probably came from a lab that he was funding. And yet he came out and lied to us for year after year that of course it came from a pangolin, and you're racist to think maybe came from a Chinese lab funded by the Americans. So I don't know where it came from, but the fact that that discussion was impossible was one of the things that just really broke my trust that the most trusted person in America on this issue would lie to us. and then there's no discussion after. And to add to that, we have dozens, perhaps hundreds of these labs around the world. There's no discussion about shutting them down. I would rather that, if it's possible, that something 100 times worse than COVID could come out of a lab and devastate their population. We can't even talk about, should we be studying smallpox that's 90% lethal and as spreadable as COVID? So I'd love to know your thoughts on how do we have that discussion so we can bring that trust back for people like myself.
See, this is the one. Where was Vivek? No.
Vivek, do you want to come up to this? Do you want to come up and say something?
Our public health person here. Well, that is a tough question. I personally think, again, this comes into the fact that Fauci was hoping to try probably to get the Americans to do the most they could to stop it. And I think, to some extent, where it started would have been a distraction at the point of when they just had to get it stopped. Because at that point, it was already out. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to figure out where it came from, because obviously we don't want it to happen again. But at the beginning, I think the point is that we can't get bogged down in the blame game as much as we should be figuring out how to stop this spread. So, you know, if he's come out now, I haven't followed what you're saying, so I don't know the story behind what Fauci did or did not know. But we do need to have conversations always. We do need to know, I think, the risk assessment. I mean, because there will be people on the other side saying we are studying these so that we can be ready for whatever happens. And so there's reasons to study these types of things in labs, but the conversation and on the dangers of it, and again, are we putting in enough blocks to make sure people don't get hurt, right? So the conversations have to happen. But I don't know what we can do to restore your trust. But
Well, I just want to thank you for coming out tonight as one maybe step forward in rebuilding that trust, and hopefully this network will help put you on that pathway. So.
We'll go to this side now. Oh, no, okay. Back there, way at the very back. So.
I want to talk about the long timeline for science in this area. You know, 20 years ago, we were promised, the citizens of Waterloo were promised that this was going to be the epicenter for quantum computing, the world's quantum computing center. Perimeter Institute came online, the Institute for Quantum Computing got a whole bunch of rock stars to sign up. Then Quantum Valley came along to promise us that it was going to be commercialized. And 20 years later, crickets. And I'm wondering why, in this information-dominated society, science doesn't feel the obligation to keep the public informed about all these breakthroughs, all these promises, so that we can continue to be excited instead of being left in the dark for 20 years.
I think this one's for me because that's a physics question.
Okay, sure.
So now I agree, and I think most people would agree that probably quantum has been hyped maybe a little too much. But I wouldn't say we are still one of the world's players in it, and they just had an announcement from our Minister Champagne that they are putting large money into the Canadian effort. The effort is sort of overblown now because of the huge U.S. companies have come in and given a lot more than the Canadian government, which gets back to my first slide, into this. I will say, though, that again, it's a timescale thing, and people can keep promising. I don't know that I heard that people would say when they would have had a quantum computer, but I will tell you that in my field, where I worked at the Laboratory for Laser Energetics as a grad student, laser fusion was always 20 years away, okay? And you heard that in the 60s, and you heard it in the 80s, and you heard it in the 2000s. We finally have had, in 2022, scientific break-even. And it took that long to get it, and now all of a sudden people are racing to put money to see if we can make it into something that can be used. But even that, no one's thinking is going to happen in less than 20 years. And so it does, quantum computing is like one of the most fundamental areas of physics. And so the time scale should have never been promised. But you know, the problem is that it could have happened, and there could have been the breakthrough, and it could have happened in less than 20 years. But but it was a long shot. But it's still happening, and there's still a lot of money being spent on it, and there are still a lot of outcomes happening with it.
Okay, now let's definitely go to this side of the
How can you see with
Thank you. One of the things I have to say I'm surprised not to have heard this evening is the observation that science is a self-correcting mechanism, and that the salespeople for science have done it a great disservice over time in terms of presenting it as a static and true body of knowledge. And what can we do as scientists to reinforce the notion that it is in fact a self-correcting mechanism that has built-in ways of changing what had been truths X number of years ago into things that are no longer recognized as truths but have been replaced and superseded by other truths. I'm old enough to remember when climate change was described as the impending next ice age. And that has turned 180 degrees in my own lifetime. And that kind of phenomenon that isn't underpinned by a sales pitch for science as a self-correcting mechanism does a great disservice to the enterprise as a whole. So I'm wondering if any of you have any
Maybe
observations about that.
I think that's a really great point, and I think Donna touched on it when she was talking about understanding the scientific process and knowing that it is dynamic and things do change over time, and letting the public know that that is part of what science is. It's not, like you said, static, and that some things we know now and we continue to know, gravity, whatever it might be, but that as we gain new information, our understanding does change over time, and that this is a normal process. And I totally agree with you that that's something that we do need to explain more. And again, when we go to the high schools and stuff, when we talk the science teachers, I think it starts with the science teachers there explaining what science is, how it works, how we engage in science, and how it does change over time, which makes it really exciting because there's always more problems to think about and different ways to think about them.
And one of the things that I would really hope that we could get to all the way back to elementary school is that until we get to graduate school, we usually teach science about what we already know. And so this is where this comes from, is that it's a known thing. And when you get into grad school, you have to further science. So that's when you finally ask the question, why is it working like this? How come it works this way? What do you do? And it's once you hit grad school, it's all about what you don't know. And so I think this is one of the things that we really do have to get into the schools and out into the public in understanding the scientific process. It is all about finding out what we don't know, and you're absolutely right, is that when we've gone from Newton to Einstein and then on to the quantum people, and I'm sure in 100 years there will be something that shows that that's all wrong and that only works in this limit and something else will come along. And that's the exciting part about science, is that it is always evolving. And so it is funny that those of us in the science process don't get that out louder and clearer, that it's all about what we don't know. It's not really about what we do know.
I think, too, I want to touch on a point that we heard twice now, and that is letting people know. So that also comes trust in the source that's telling you, right? It's fine if something's happening, but if you don't trust the CBC, or you don't trust, the University of Waterloo's press releases, I mean, there is a layer to that as well, right? Like, if you don't trust the source, then you don't believe anything you're reading anyway. That seems like a bigger problem than we can tackle tonight. But it's just, yeah, like, I mean, and
if we keep saying we don't know, will people trust us? Because then they'll all just go,
Right.
well, they don't even know, so why are we trusting
Yeah.
them? So it is a delicate balancing act on having the conversation multiple ways.
But I do think we need to think about it when we think about science, the people that produce knowledge, new knowledge through new scientific knowledge, and then the people that consume it or try and understand it. We have a gap there that we need to understand that. And if we think about it on technology, we have the people that are designing and developing technologies, and we have the people that are using those technologies. Again, what is the gap? And I think we need to understand and make it more transparent as to if the technology, how the kind of principles and guiding principles around how the technology was designed and developed. So the people that are using it have some trust that guiding principles have been used. We don't talk about those things now when we use technology. What were the guiding principles? And in this community, Communitech has been wonderful with their Tech for Good initiative, where the entrepreneurial companies, many of them technology-based, are signing on to kind of a code of ethics around the technologies that they're developing. And if they're not following those, I think those kinds of initiatives do lead to trust.
Right. I mean, all we care about is that we only have one bar on our cell phone. Like,
Right,
we're
yeah,
not
in
really worried
terms of-
about the ethics behind why,
Yeah, and
you know,
people
smartphones
that
were
grow up in a
invented.
developed country, they grow up with all these things around them, and they really don't understand where they all came from in some sense. So whereas when you look at kids that grow up in developing nations, many more of them aspire to be scientists and engineers because they see inherently the value that some of these developments could bring. So.
I want to go to a sort of in this same vein, there's a live online question. Do you think the decrease in accessibility of scientific research and literature for the public has had an impact on the understanding and connection to scientific research and methods? That sort of goes to the communication part of it, right?
Okay, so first I have to say I don't understand this question because in working with a science organization that publishes, everything has been about open access. So really, I would think that our science, we almost all have to publish now in open access journals so that you can just get online and see whatever is published. So I don't understand
Maybe they
the question.
mean that, it would be difficult for someone that didn't have a physics background to read a paper about physics. So maybe they mean accessibility in terms of being able to access the knowledge that's contained in the papers in terms of the way we present it.
Maybe, maybe
been
more
decreasing.
digestible perhaps.
Well, that the way that the information is so complicated, or maybe we present it in a complicated way that they're having difficulty understanding and accessing it in that way in terms of the inherent knowledge in there and the impact it'll have on their lives perhaps, so.
Maybe if this person's really live, they can
They can kind of
they can
Prove it.
explain. Well, but I'm just wondering, are there there used to be maybe more Scientific American kind of journals?
Right.
Are there less of those now, and I don't know that there are less of those now?
Speaking from someone who works in the media, we all know this. The shattering and fracturing of where we get our information from is just astounding now. There isn't a National Geographic magazine that everyone turns to, or Scientific American that everyone turns to.
Okay.
And I think that sort of went to the question of, do we trust the source that we're getting it from? But if that person is online, refer to that question and clarify a bit, and we'll come back if you can. Is there any way to dim these lights a tiny bit?
It's hard to see.
I'm the only one doing this.
Are they just on or off? Because it's just, I feel like there's some retinal problems happening now. Okay, we're going to go to,
there we go. They're turning them
that's a
down a
bit
little bit.
better.
Yeah.
Can you still see
here.
us? Okay, thank you for the lights. Thank you. Right up front here.
Hi, thank you for this. It's very informative. I'm not a scientist, I'm a politician. So
Excellent.
my question is around, we talk about communication, relaying information, trust. In the current climate, there's not a lot of trust for politicians.
What?
We never said that.
And I'm speaking specifically to, the trust research, what type of collaboration work, what is the role that government can play in this, and especially around just, debunking some of the things around science and the lack of trust? What do you see with that and in that element?
Ashley, do you want to?
Sure. So I think there are some ways that, in terms of collaborations, I think there are lots of ways to talk about what we know from the research on trust and why trust erodes, or maybe how it needs to be earned back and sustained. So I think there's points of the current research that tell us a lot about how we can do some of that. I think some of the other challenges that we have, though, in doing some of that work and relaying any, I think, maybe useful perspectives is that there's kind of a lack of qualitative data that, so we run all these surveys that tell us, if you trust science or you trust the government as institutions and these sorts of things. So some of the work that we've been doing really looks at how are we going to collect more qualitative data that's going to actually tell us about why maybe someone doesn't trust in government, or what level, or how that might be earned back. So currently we have a research assistant who's been compiling a lot of the surveys to look at some of that work. So we're hoping that we'll be able to have those conversations once we know a little bit more about that with folks, especially on the policy side, and thinking about how to engage maybe in more collaborative work on the sort of second part of that question with, what different levels of government might do. I think in some ways it's also the question of clarifying roles, right? Which we see with the pandemic where some of it's, sort of a civics conversation, right? About what is somebody's role? If they're a public health official, what is their role in government? Are they in a bureaucratic role? Are they in a sort of, more health expert role? So I think some of those conversations are also just important to understand what everybody's role is in the response to a situation. Otherwise, or even just the conversation about which pieces are partisan and which are nonpartisan of government, right? So those sorts of conversations I think are really important to how we talk about trust or earning trust or not having trust potentially with the polarization we see.
We'll ask,
There's
is
somebody
someone
at
out
the
there with a
back over there.
microphone? Okay, right at the back there, okay.
Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm an aspiring writer that's like a bit friend by AGI, but like I'm getting past that. My question is, what do you do when sciences conflict with goals such as, getting to carbon neutral when fossil fuels companies don't want that, or politicians pandering to a base that doesn't trust science? No offense to the politician here.
That's a great question. I mean, and it sort of goes to what you talked about, the economics of it, right? And there also is governmental bureaucracies as well. That's a good question.
Well, again, and we saw this, though, not just with climate concerns and during that, but we saw it in COVID. And as you said, the public leaders were mostly, for the most part in Canada, trying to say we're following the science. And they would put up their public health work until they said something that wasn't going to be politically really wonderful for that person to, and then there is these conflicts that showed up. And so it's the same thing, is that there is more than one thing at play. And, just like some of the other conversations we've had, I think we have to bring in every single one and try to find probably the compromise situation, right? And maybe that's not the best, but I think we have to have a collective discussion about all of these things, because just like we thought we were being so safe for the children to keep them out of school, they definitely didn't get COVID, and we didn't know how it would affect children, and so we thought we were doing the right thing. And now we look at it and go, maybe we didn't do the right thing. And so it's probably not an all or nothing, usually, because we can't bring down the whole economic part of some region because we're thinking all the other way either, right? It's a tough one.
It's a tough one. I think, again, we need to, the more we can educate the people and to think critically, to analyze information critically, to not just take everything at face value, the better, in terms of them being able to make an informed decision as to the motivations for someone maybe saying one thing that is contrary to science. How can we empower them to be able to, critique the information more accurately in some way? And this goes to, what Donna was talking about, understanding the scientific process. How can they look at it and critique it, I would say. How do we develop those critical thinking skills in people and keep them engaged in the conversation? That's so important, so.
But also, I think honesty is always going to be our best policy, because I think when people are speaking from an either political point of view or an economic point of view or a science point of view, we all do have to be honest in how much we really understand, how much it really is based on, the economics and not what we're telling you. I mean, this is why hopefully the conversations that we have bring up the level of honesty, because I think maybe that will also help with the level of trust all along too, when we start thinking that we are talking to each other with an honest opinion.
I do want to get to this question here, and it seems like a question I should ask at the end, but we're going to ask now, and maybe we can hit it again at the end, because it's a live online question from Hong Kong. How would you like volunteers like me to support this wonderful trust network?
And it's an Angelum, so
It's
Yeah,
an
it-
Angelum.
yeah,
Thank you
yeah,
so
it's
much
an-
for
yeah,
joining
yeah,
us.
yeah.
So, and when I'm out in Hong Kong, please come and see us when we're there. So, I think, well, clearly you're engaging right now, so that's wonderful. I think, I don't know, what do you think, Ashley? Are there other, as we evolve it, what maybe for someone that's not here, but so couldn't engage in our citizen science, or?
Right, yeah, so we will certainly have opportunities like the participatory science work that we're starting up, but because we are so new, some of what we're doing at this stage is also beginning to sort of explore possibilities for collaborations and where folks might join. So we're certainly going to have opportunities sort of coming up, but if you also have a compelling sort of idea or sense of in some of what we've talked about where your kind of work might fit, definitely reach out to us, and I'm happy to chat with folks too.
Yeah, proactive. That's
Be proactive.
Yeah. Let's take them. Yeah, we'll take them in the middle here, up here. Just, yeah. Okay, we'll do this one first, and then the one behind.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
okay.
By the way, I'm huge fans of all of you, and Donna Strickland, I did my project of Everyday Hero on you.
Oh.
You guys inspired me
great.
so much. And as a high school student, I'm wondering that what I can do, because I always see like fake news online about like flat earth or like global warming. I wonder what I can do as a high school student to help in spread the trust of science.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. That's great.
But are you putting flat Earth and global warming on the same level? Yes, I know, because I heard how the flat Earth people were going to take a cruise until they found out that GPS had to actually use the fact that the Earth was a sphere in order to do it. And so they decided not to cruise. Which, yeah, it's remarkable. So I don't know how one engages, but one must always engage. But
So,
it's
yeah,
a
no,
tough
well,
one.
first of all, thank you for coming out tonight. And clearly, you're someone that's an engaged person that's going to go on to be a leader in the future. So I think that, when we think about, I just thought of this now, so I don't know, Ashley and Dot, if you think it's a good idea, but at some point, as we're evolving it, maybe we'll even create little local chapters within the high schools and stuff for people that want to explore. So if there's really that kind of energy and passion around the importance of it, maybe we could create those little local chapters in terms of that. So, and again, the Citizen Science Project we have been discussing is this air quality one. There may be ways for you to engage in that in terms of, bringing it to the kids in schools and things like that. And, I'd always love to even do, I don't know if I want to call it a contest, but just an opportunity for people, everyday people, to identify disinformation around science and really just to start to give examples of what this looks like and to kind of call it out a little bit. So maybe there's ways in that. So those are just some things off the top of my head, but stay in touch with us. And as we get further and further along, I'm sure there's going to be ways for you to engage with us.
But can I ask you back, which way do you think high school students of today would like to interact? Would you like it to be a provocative thing where you would have people taking two different sides and having a real conversation in public? See, we all sort of think the same thing while we all stand up here and talk to you. Would high school students like this, or would they like to see something provocative?
More like a debate.
I'm not sure. Well, I personally, I think I would really love to see a debate on both sides and then, use my own knowledge to see this. Although I feel like this is also a really great way for us to engage, asking questions. Although the only problem is, getting high school students here. Because, I saw this on Instagram, and that's how I came here. Although, we're advertising me, but I'm not sure. I think both would be a great option.
How many other high school students are there out there? Let's show of hands.
Oh, there's a couple. Wow, there's a couple over here.
So
That's great.
we have the microphone is back there with someone else, right? Over here.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Hey, I'm going to stand up because
Thank
I'm
you.
short and otherwise can't see you. I'm actually a graduate student researcher at the Institute for Quantum Computing, and so I really appreciate your question, because interestingly, it's sort of the flip side of what I was going to ask, which is I notice oftentimes that there's sort of, we struggle a little bit, speaking for myself and some other people in the field, to sort of toe the line between sort of overstating our research and its impact and overpromising advances, but then still maintaining public interest. So in a field like this, where there's not always necessarily sort of a direct application to individual lives, you're not going to have a quantum computer in your house in the next couple of years, or maybe even ever. Do you have any recommendations or any thoughts on how we can still sort of maintain public engagement in this type of research?
Yeah. I mean, I guess, I'm a researcher myself, and I think it's always, you can think very aspirationally of where you hope it will lead in the future. And just, again, to be honest about, the aspirational intentions of where it could go versus the reality of where we are today. And to both inspire people with the future, but also pragmatically, kind of give them a sense of the time scale of where we're at today and realistically where things might be in the future. So that's how I try and balance it when I speak about some of the things we hope in the future, and even keeping yourself motivated as to why you're toiling away in the lab every night. Research flows and ebbs, and that on those days you do think, I always ground myself in that aspirational things of where we're trying to go in the future and reminding myself of that. So that's how I deal with it as a researcher. So.
Nice.
If I could just, I was just going to jump in and say, I think the other thing too that you can sort of think about the different appeals, and rhetorician Jeannie Fonestock has talked about this. There are appeals to the sort of application of science that you can make to broader audiences, but there's also an appeal to wonder, right? Which is what a lot of research that is maybe a little further out, or maybe less directly applicable to everybody's daily lives would have. So I think those appeals to wonder are also, they generate science interest, right?
Yeah,
So and they're inspiring.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
I want to go to a live online question here, and I will confess that there's a word in here I'm not sure I totally get the application of, but it's a live question that says, I feel a lot of info, or even the industry itself, including law and politics, were heavily influenced by commercialization. It is easy to lose trust once this tag is attached. How do we rectify this? By commercialization, are we talking about sponsorships?
No, I think they're looking at kind of profit motivation. So again, if you think about technologies where, I mean, let's think of Facebook, for example, where their algorithm that they've monetized is around kind of putting profits over people, I think is maybe where they're getting at.
So is this rectifiable?
Well, I think it is, but I mean, in my most optimistic self that, and again, I think it goes back to, we have such a privilege at this institution to be able to train and educate the people that are going out to be future leaders. And it's part of our duty is to ground them in the ethics and, expose them to that in terms of the obligation they have to society in the roles that they play. And so I think that's where it starts, really.
How much has that ethos already been there? You know what I mean? Like, are we talking like decades? That's sort of been the vibe of sending people off into the world with that sort of ethical.
In engineering, for sure. And I mean, to be honest, when we look at how engineers are paid, I mean, maybe not today. When I was graduating, lawyers and business people always made more than engineers. People generally went into engineering because they love science, they love technology. So it wasn't right away driven by making lots of money. I guess I'm speaking as an engineer, so I will have that bias when I think about it. So I think that's always been there. And then we are part of a profession that is deeply rooted in the safety of the public at all costs and things like that, over profits. And to become a professional engineer, you have to sign on to this kind of code of ethics of what we are meant to do as engineers with the public. So there are definitely elements in the engineering profession there. So I'm not sure.
But there's a flip side to this question, and it goes back to our two quantum computing questions, is that in order to get funding, you pretty much have to say that it's going to lead to something that's useful someday, or people don't want to fund it. If we want to get funding, we have to have the public, and so then scientists tend to be driven to say, yes, we'll have a quantum computer that you get to use, whereas the scientists doing it are all about the wonder of what does quantum entanglement really mean. And so there's this push and shove, is that we're sort of encouraged to say, yes, it'll have a commercial application, and so we will fund you. We are, then I think too many people then overhype, because that way they get even more money. And the reality is, and the point I keep trying to make, is that we have to find a way to let the fundamental scientists just do their fundamental science, and the next people in the chain, and there is a chain all the way from the real application engineer to the most fundamental scientist, and in between, the scientists and engineers are spanning it, and it will take that fundamental and eventually percolate, at least the best of it will percolate up. But it's very hard when fundamental scientists are still told in their grant applications, you better have an absolute use for that, And so this is the push and the pull that from the science side and from the public side, where we start to have these problems.
Tensions, yeah.
I want to do just this follow-up live online question, because it's the person who talked about accessibility. The earlier question about research not being accessible, they're clarifying now. Number one, primary research behind a paywall. And number two, scientific language is no longer accessible language. And we sort of addressed that. But the paywall thing.
Well, this is what I'm getting to, is that it seems to me that that is actually going further and further away, is that very few of us now get to publish anything that is behind a paywall. So that's what surprised me about the question. I agree that the scientific language is no longer accessible, and so we do maybe need then more media science magazines that do take the scientific literature and rewrite it like Scientific American did. Well, I think they still do for many years. But of course, one magazine can only look at so many things per month. And so maybe that's what they're talking about. We need more scientific media.
Let's do another one in the room. Another question. We'll go over here on the right. Whoever you choose, the power is in your hands with the microphone.
Hi, I want to thank the speakers for coming. I'm excited about this initiative and I want it to succeed. I've heard a few words and terms tossed about today about, those people or rabbit holes or misinformation, and I think if we want this initiative to succeed, we need to be really careful about how we talk about people who we perceive as on the other side, whatever side we happen to stand on. Part of opening a conversation will be actually wanting to know the other side. And I wonder how, going forward, you're going to address topics like, early on in the pandemic, we saw internet censorship, content being removed from YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. And there became a general perspective, a point of view came about that scientists weren't willing to listen, were willing to shut down other points of view, and were willing to use government as a strong arm to silence the debate, when we all know science is about debate. And I wonder how scientists can address that, especially through the rhetoric that we're using in this scientific conversation going forward. What needs to be redressed in the way we talk about science and the way we talk about differing points of view? Thank you.
Do you want to?
Thank you.
That's definitely
Sure.
You mentioned the word rhetoric, so I figured it was for you.
Yeah, so I think that's a really important question and point about how we're talking about folks. And I think in some ways those conversations where you use terms that are diminishing to others immediately shut the conversation down before it even has an opportunity to begin. So I'm less familiar with some of what happened on YouTube, but I think generally some of the principles that we can think about are really trying to identify with one another and figure out what the concerns are that are being aired, and then also have mechanisms to engage in those conversations that understand sort of the points that each party or parties are coming to that conversation with. So are we starting with questions of facts or values, right? So really sort of understanding there are different ways that folks are coming to conversations with different concerns and perspectives. And that's where what we had mentioned earlier, and we talk a lot about in not engaging in sort of deficit model thinking about sort of, we'll just tell folks more facts and then they'll agree, becomes an important strategy, right? Because we know that's not effective and we know there are concerns that aren't addressed by science or aren't scientific questions that relate to science or move into the domain or intersect with science. So as we're approaching this research and these studies and these conversations, we're really sort of proceeding with that framework of trying to understand first and not just sort of come in and, we don't want to tell anybody what to think or what to do, right? That's not the goal here. So really that sort of ongoing dialogue is critical to what we're trying to do.
Okay, another question here.
Hello.
Right here. Yeah?
This is a bit off topic perhaps, but do you have any advice or anecdotes about how to help establish or strengthen trust in yourself, whether that's you as like a developer, building some product, or like as a consumer, let's say like reading the news and trying to decide on what to follow?
I don't think that's off topic at all.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
No.
So, sorry, can you just repeat the question again? I had a little bit of trouble hearing right at the
How do
beginning.
you establish and build and establish and maintain trust in yourself?
In yourself as a
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
So, well, I think that the first thing is, as Donna was saying, you have to be honest with people. And, I'm the Dean of Engineering, so, I try to be honest with the students, the faculty and staff as much as I'm able to. There may be moments in time where for confidentiality reasons I can't, and that may make you vulnerable as a leader in things, and that's okay. And to feel comfortable in that, and to feel comfortable with who you are. I mean, I'm just speaking very personally now in terms of what I try and do and what I think helps to engender trust with other people. So, and I think it is having honest conversations, and sometimes the conversations may be difficult, and you do it as empathetically as you can, but it's important to be honest with people. And be honest if you don't know the answers to things at that moment in time, but that you can go out and try. So to me, the basis of it is honesty and being authentic and being who you are versus more of a performer type thing. Because I think that if it seems like it's a performance, then people will begin to wonder who is this person really and things. So I'm just speaking very kind of honestly with you right now about these are some of the things that the values that I hold. So.
But I will say, because I get asked this question a lot, especially because I'm the role model for women in STEM now, apparently. And I get asked the question about the imposter syndrome all the time. And my answer is, I've never had it so bad as since winning the Nobel Prize. And so I can tell you it has nothing to do with your level of accomplishment or anything else, right? It is all of a sudden you're watching, the way I perceive it now is that everybody just thinks that I'm so brilliant, I should have the answer to everything. And I just simply cannot, right? And so I have found it a very frustrating experience in a way about how much people perceive. And so this is what we all do with each other. And this is what you're talking about. You're working with somebody, and we're always wondering how the other person is perceiving you. And it's a tricky thing. And I'm just going to give you this little anecdote. Is that one of the first places that I went to visit after winning the Nobel Prize was Berkeley. And I thought, this is crazy. They're Nobel laureates are a dime a dozen at Berkeley. Do they really need to see me? And there was a brand new young professor who was going to show me his research, and it was pretty far from my area. And I kept thinking, oh my gosh, he thinks I'm so smart because I'm a Nobel laureate, and I'm not following this. So I kept asking him questions and kept asking him questions and kept asking him, and I kept thinking, he must think I am the stupidest Nobel laureate. And by the end, I get back to my host, and he said, oh, so-and-so came in and said that you were so brilliant with your probing questions. He couldn't believe just how brilliant you were. I thought, that's the problem. We're all just worried about ourselves a little too much, okay? So.
That's a great story.
We'll do another one in the, yeah, there we go, right over here on the left, yes.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Lyashko, and I've just started computer engineering here. It was mentioned earlier the topic of how society interacts with new research and new science. So Dr. Strickland, I'd like to ask you this directly. Sort of on the idea, and in your capacity as someone who brings that new research forward, what do you believe about perhaps a presumption that we might operate under that all science is worth pursuing, as perhaps was doubted in the 40s after the creation of the nuclear weapons?
Oh, okay. You went like this with me. I thought you were going to say some science is just useless. And I will also tell you, I won an award last year called the Golden Goose Award. Yeah, that's what it was. And I had to look it up. And it was because it's a US award. And some member of Congress used to hand out some award, Golden Fleece Award, because they would point out which research had gotten federal money that had gone nowhere. And so this other person said, well, now we're going to have another award for research that didn't go anywhere until it did. Okay? And so that's where I thought you were going with this. And then I was going to say, yes, you don't know which research. And so and I also am a very egalitarian person. So I believe that people should get to do research if it interests them. Then possibly there's a reason it interests them. And they should get to pursue it if there's enough funding, which gets back to my original, let's spend more money on research. But if you're saying instead that there's like bad research to do because it could lead, and this is where ethics comes in, right, and trust comes in, is that, a nuclear energy can be good, it can be bad. But it's up to us. AI can be good, it can be bad. All of these things that we do and all these new technologies that are coming along so fast, some could be good and some can be bad, but it's up to the people to use it. I personally don't ever think that science shouldn't be pursued. I think the ethics has to be pursued along with it. but science should be pursued. This is my own thing.
I might just add, like, I think in the case you give, clearly there was, you know, a very specific purpose for some of the work they were doing when they were making the atomic bomb and things. And I think, you know, the scientists that work on that really struggled morally in terms of both advancing knowledge, but the eventual impact it would have on society. But today, you know, I think maybe more of an issue is we may develop new technologies where we are intending it to be used for good, and yet, you know, you're an engineering student, you may not even have the capacity to think about what are all the other ways it may be used that I haven't even thought of, the unintended consequences. And social media, I think, is a good example where the original intent of it was to be very good. We unleashed it on the world, it scaled up very quickly so everybody has it, and suddenly we're shocked by how it has been used for disinformation, malinformation, all these things. And the people that had originally put it together really didn't think of those things at the time. So how can we educate people differently so that they have a little bit more breadth of knowledge of the unintended consequences of what they're doing, so they will be more careful. And I do think we should be careful scaling technologies too quickly till we better understand how they may be used. So why do we have to scale everything so quickly? Why don't we just slow down a little bit, try it out, see if it's working, and get more and more knowledge before we just say, everybody can use it now, type thing, so.
We'll do another one in the room. There's a hand up over here. We'll go to this one in the back there, and then we'll go to over here. Oh.
Oh.
Yeah, over here on the left, our left.
Yeah, sorry. I'm also from Hong Kong, coincidentally.
Oh, nice. Welcome.
Yeah, we wanted to know, since we're all talking about trust in science, there must be some factors or forces that are incentivized to undermine trust in science. So the question is, what could be done to systematically and sustainably disincentivize those that have an incentive to undermine trust in science?
Well, good looking at each other on that one.
Let me take this. I'll take this.
Yeah, you take it,
No,
Greg.
no. Good question. Yes.
I think one of the challenges with, well, on the systematic side, I think part of the challenge with that is the distinct kinds of motivations that you're going to run into for folks who maybe are engaging in those practices. So I think the other thing is, you know, when you talk about incentivizing it, I think we also have to ask the question of what incentives are there to do that work. And I think sometimes they're pretty considerable incentives to undermine trust in science, right? And we've seen some of these cases play out where sometimes it's to sow division, including for political ends. So I think these sorts, and these things don't always happen out in the open, right? Until there's a scandal, and then we sort of say, oh, look, this particular institute or group was doing this kind of work, and now we see this happening. So I think those sort of information operations side of it is really difficult to address, if that's sort of getting at the question. But I think systematically responding to it is also challenging too, and some of what I guess would not allow you to do it systematically is also just the variety of forms it's going to take, right? So it's hard sometimes to even figure out if what you're looking at is a strategic and intentional effort, or if it's just sort of something that's been miscommunicated and sort of spun out. I don't know that that's a satisfying answer at all, but that's, I guess.
It's a hard question.
Yeah, I think there's a microphone in a hand here, yes?
This is a follow-on to the questions about trust in technology. And Donna started with, you know, there's some technology that could be used for good and some that could be used for bad, and we don't know. And Mary carried on, well, we have to wait for a while to figure out whether it might be good or what the other implications are. But something like ChatGPT, like, why do you build in that you make up false information? I mean, that's built into the technology. How can that be being used for good? Yeah. And what are the ethics behind that? And I've asked, you know, computer science students about that, and they say, oh, well, we're not responsible for that. It's just a black box. We just have to take what's there. How do we get around that? That's going to undermine tremendous trust in science and technology people.
Yeah, no, I think you raise a really good example, and I don't know. I go back to how we're educating young people in terms of rooting them in the ethics of what they're doing and the responsibility they do have. I don't think it is reasonable for the computer scientists, the engineers that build these things to say, well, it's not my fault that they're being used in this way, especially if they know and are aware that there is false information or it's perpetuating false information and things. So I think we have to start there, and I speak like that because I am an educator in things. But then I think, we do need to think a lot more about governance of technology in the future. And, maybe it's because of the speed of how things are evolving in technology, but we're so far behind in terms of how we're governing technology. But even to have some type of a framework to start so that we have guiding principles around how we will govern the technology and how we will assess it and its trustworthiness or something like that. So these are all things we're hoping to explore as part of this network and maybe help to move some public policy forward and things as well. So, I mean, we're very lucky in this community. We have the Basili School as well, and they're all about kind of international governance and things. So maybe there's an opportunity there around thinking more about governance of technology in the future. And again, educating students that are designing and developing these also a little bit more about regulating it and governing it and things like that, and getting more engineers and scientists into those fields as well, since they have a deeper understanding about it. Those are just some of my thoughts. So.
But again, there's going to always be more than one side to every story. So if you go back to the Manhattan Project, the government would have said there is our safety at play, and so we're going to do this and possibly unleash this horror on the world. But you could also see the other side to say, to save the United States, we will do this, right? So there's so much to ethics that it's very hard for those of us just saying trust in science that. And I don't know any reason why somebody thought it was good to put false information out there. I don't know, and I don't, again, know this exact case. But you can imagine that there's going to be reasons, depending on which way you look at it, that it made perfect sense to do it that way because there was some application for it. It may just be economics and they can sell it and it's a bad thing. I don't know. But there is many sides to all these questions, which is why there has to be multiple conversations.
Mm-hmm. And there'll be an AI discussion too. So we'll talk about that at the end. So stay tuned for that. Not tonight, but another one from inside the room, if there is one. Okay. Okay. Is that way at the back there? Okay. Way at the back, yeah. Okay.
Okay. I mean, what you're doing is really noble, but to me, it's a real formidable challenge because at places like Facebook and Instagram and Google, you have like literally thousands of engineers using the largest computers in the world, whose purpose is to establish engagement. In order to do that, they push people to the fringes. They want users to be disinformed, polarized, and angry, and so it seems to me that the thing that undermines trust in technology and science is science and technology.
I remember when my grandmother was afraid of the telephone. So, and yet, obviously, we wouldn't want, when the Rogers went down, did we not all get upset? So I think we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater either. And so I think partly why we're doing this is that there are these grave concerns, and I think it is, unfortunately, I agree with you, anger sells. And this is, I think, our biggest problem. This is why misinformation is taking off. It feeds each other's anger, and somehow we enjoy being angry, and I don't understand that. But we can't just let it go. One has to fight it. But I don't know that you're blaming the technology is necessarily the answer. I think it's the fact that we have to figure out if we can use it better than we do. And there always has to be voices counteracting the negative voices. That's all I think.
But again,
So
I think it goes
to
to regulation, transparency. I hear what you're saying, and it's the algorithms they've developed that when you are angry, you spend more time. And so it's about monetizing this and building on it. And You know, I would hope if we had some regulation, like really there has been very little regulation. We're starting to see some of it coming in now, especially for some of the companies you mentioned. But why is it? Why is it that, you know, we're not stepping up to put more regulation in? And maybe some of this work here will help to advance those conversations and to advance more regulation, more reasonable regulation of these technologies as they're coming out, because things are continuing to accelerate. We have more and more technologies coming out. So I don't think we can just sit back and say they're being used in a bad way and there's nothing we can do about it. We have to try and do something about it.
I think in addition to the regulation, there's also, and I think this is something that the network hopes to do and talk about more is, and we've heard some of this in different threads as well throughout the questions with the replication crisis and some of the other issues around incentivizing in science and technology. And I think all of those questions about how science and technology is incentivized both within university or research contexts, but also within sort of those development contexts are questions we're really interested in, because I think those do erode trust in science and technology when they play out badly for public. So thinking more about that and approaches like regulation are absolutely things we want to look into more and study.
I want to take one more question because we're running short on time here. I want to take one more question. These are sort of similar, but we'll ask the first one from live online. And this is something that will also be part of the AI discussion, I'm sure. The terms misinformation and disinformation have been used. Could someone explain the difference between these?
Yeah, Ashley, this
Sure.
is your
So sort of basic division between them is disinformation is intentional and designed to inform you in a deceptive way. And misinformation is, the intention's not always clear, right? So it could just be you accidentally share something and it wasn't true and you didn't mean to. So that's kind of the distinction that's often made.
Okay, well, that's good. We'll take over here.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I'm a PhD candidate in the English department here at Waterloo, and I also teach one of the sections of engineering communication here at Waterloo, so I have computer engineering students right now. And I'm probably not the only person who's ever sometimes felt a disciplinary or a culture of superiority that engineering and science has over the humanities and the social sciences. That wasn't meant to be a joke, but okay.
No, I think that was more of empathetic response.
I appreciate that. So my question is, what does the Trust Network hope to accomplish in terms of supporting and empowering humanities and social scientists, experts, and how can we see that trickle-down effect in our academic programs in the future?
And don't you always tell the engineering students, you have to come to us, we don't have to take your courses? I don't understand. I don't see how they can say they have the superiority when they have to come to you.
So I think and I think that sort of hierarchy of the disciplines definitely happens outside of Waterloo, right? So this is sort of something we all probably know or have heard kind of in these contexts, but I think it's really changing, and I think the kind of work, even the engineering, and I'm teaching one of the science communication courses for first-year students this year, so we have these great courses, so I think that kind of work is really starting to transform some of those conversations, because we are sort of showing, this engagement across engineering and science and the humanities and social sciences. And I think even just the composition of the Trust Network shows that, obviously folks are willing to have these conversations across disciplines and take it quite seriously, right? I'm the English professor here, right? So in terms of disciplinary hierarchy and prestige, in some ways, you could characterize that in certain ways. But I think, I've certainly felt respected and heard by colleagues, and I think Trust is really committed to furthering, I think, that kind of work that's happening both in Trust, but broadly at Waterloo, like in those courses, to really kind of bring everybody's knowledge together and ensure that, we have that kind of important cross-pollination to answer exactly these kinds of questions about what are the ethical entailments, how do we communicate, how do we talk to each other, how do we understand each other, and bring that to science and technology.
Yeah, and I think one thing we have been talking about amongst the leadership team is the opportunity for students to engage, the undergraduate students, in an interdisciplinary capstone project as a way to bring people from different disciplines together, engineers with the arts, the humanities and things like that, environment, health, because we do need to know each other's languages, and we do need to understand how people from different knowledge disciplines approach problems differently. And that will only enhance our own understanding of, for engineers, designing and developing technologies that can be used by a multitude of different people instead of just their own lens. And how important the diversity of thought is and understanding different perspectives. So I'm hopeful that this network and other initiatives will help to create those opportunities. So.
Okay, we'll do one more question from the floor if there is one. We'll go in the middle up here. You talk amongst yourselves until the...
Hi. So my question is, when it comes to the hesitance to trust scientists, what is your opinion on that? Because it would make sense that people don't really are hesitant to trust the scientists because we have lack of information around us.
Do you want to start, Don?
I didn't quite understand the question.
I think he's saying because of the lack of information they may have, that may be the beginning of why we don't trust scientists, because we don't have all the information. So what can we do to rectify that?
Well, then I guess this is where the better communications comes from. And so I suppose scientists will have to learn how to communicate better, which will come to our English friends to find that out. But we will also then have to have the conversations with everybody. So I think it is always a two-way street that we can only understand what we understand. It's very hard to understand what other people don't understand, if that makes sense. And so I think it will have to be more and more conversations. And this is what we do hope to do with this network, is go to different groups of people to find out where their distrust is coming from. And so if it's coming from a lack of information, then we'll get to learn that and hopefully address this kind of thing.
And nights like tonight are part of that, right? I mean, for sure. I want to slowly start wrapping it up here, but I do want to take one last question because it's a good one, and that is sort of, the brass tacks of this. Who is involved in the Trust Scholarly Network? Who and what kind of expertise is involved?
Ashley, do you want to?
Sure. So because we're quite new, we're still sort of rolling out and definitely involving more folks and groups in the conversations. But right now, we have representation from all of the faculties across campus, which allows us to really have some of those interdisciplinary conversations. We have some folks involved who are external to the university in different research or medical capacity. They've had sort of long careers in those areas. We're also starting to look at different working groups where we'll engage different kinds of stakeholders. So we've been having some conversations, for example, with high school teachers about, again, to that point of how do we begin to even have a bridge sort of between high school and university for students? How do we think about that and what they're learning and some continuity? So we've been doing that kind of work. And then the public participatory science we're hoping to scale out pretty broadly. So when we think about the kinds of expertise, there's definitely all of the standard sort of disciplinary expertise, but we're also looking to engage folks who have different forms of, for example, lived experience and knowledges. So that's sort of where we're going with it, but the current composition of the network is still a little bit limited at this point to sort of disciplinary and research-based in educational institutions, but we're hoping to broaden as we go.
Awesome. Ashley Mellenbacher, Mary Wells, Donna Strickland, thank you so much for taking some time tonight.
Thank you.
I mean, this has
Thank
been
you.
amazing. It's a great jumping off point, right? And I want to thank all of you for coming here and spending time with us tonight, both in person here and online. This is just a small step, right, to garnering confidence that hopefully will lead to a greater trust in science and technology. As it was brought up in a few different ways tonight, this is a gargantuan task. And I don't think anyone thinks that it's going to be easy or quick. In the new year, we hope you will join us for the second lecture in the Trust Lecture Series. It's going to be hosted on January 17th. Everyone who registered for tonight's talk will receive an invitation to attend. So be sure to mark that on your calendar, January 17th. Now, the theme for that one is Trust in Artificial Intelligence. And it's going to be in partnership with the Perimeter Institute. I want to thank the University of Waterloo for the invitation to partner with CBC Kitchener-Waterloo. Thank you very much for spending some time with us. I hope you have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.